Coming up on this week's Video Game Nation, I explore the ins and outs and ups and downs of Kickstarter.
John reveals his 5 favourite crowdfunded games.
You can train an actual octopus for less than that.
We talk to developers who've adopted people-powered publishing, and our motley crew of game lovers have a good chinwag about the impact of crowdfunding.
And I think that can only be a good thing for gaming.
They're just 4 of the perks you'll receive if you back this week's Video Game Nation. Hoover, Frisbee, Google, Kickstarter. What do they have in common? Well, yes, they are the names of my 4 children, but they're also brand names that are so well known that they've become bywords for the product or service they provide.
In Kickstarter's case, it's now to online crowdfunding what sellotape is to sticky back plastic. For the uninitiated, crowdfunding is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. A bunch of like-minded people donating cash to help fund someone else's dream project.
Pretty much anyone can seek funding for anything, so long as it's not illegal, obscene, or dangerous, which means that you'll discover some incredibly strange stuff on there.
The fact that one guy infamously raised over $55,000 to make a potato salad became headline news, but you might have missed other successful campaigns, such as the ones for bacon-scented meat soap, a cookbook for vegans trapped in a zombie apocalypse, and an endeavour to destroy a stack of champagne glasses with a grand piano in the name of art.
That last one was mine. Aside from these peculiar projects, Kickstarter and similar sites like Indiegogo and Ulule have proved to be a great way to bring new video games to fruition outside of the usual channels.
Although a few projects preceded it, Kickstarter really entered the public consciousness thanks to the success of Double Fine Adventure, now known as Broken Age. Billed as a chance for Double Fine president and ex-LucasArts designer Tim Schafer to make his triumphant return to the point-and-click genre, it raised over $3.3 million, smashing the original target by a good $2.9 million.
Clearly, there was an appetite for resurrecting franchises, reviving dormant genres, and supporting original ideas, while cutting out the publishers who decided that sort of thing wasn't for us.
It didn't take long for other frustrated developers to come forward, cap in hand, hoping to replicate Double Fine's success. And in many cases, we fell over ourselves to help. Fortunately, our goodwill has been rewarded handsomely with brilliant games like The Banner Saga, FTL, Shovel Knight, Kentucky Route Zero, and Elite Dangerous, to name surprisingly few. Actually, I'm sure these guys can name a few others.
My favourite Kickstarter game that actually did come out was last year's Shovel Knight, which is super good. It's the kind of game that you can imagine somebody's had in their head since they were 5 or 6 years old, and they've finally got the chance to make it.
So there's a game called Bear Simulator, where you get to play as a bear, and you get to go around the woods doing bear stuff, like eating honey and swatting at bees. That's like my perfect game.
I really like the look of Elite Dangerous. I really, really like the look of that. And that paired with the Rift, which obviously is another Kickstarter thing, is incredible. I mean, really, every waking hour I spend is just trying to earn enough money to be able to spend my life just playing Elite Dangerous in the Rift, sat on like a, I don't know, chair/toilet with a drip, just all day, every day. Fortunately, I'm very poor, so that will never happen.
One of the best things about the diversity and flexibility of crowdfunding is that it can allow all manner of game-related projects to be brought to life.
Kickstarter's rules are simple. If a campaign concludes without reaching its financial goal, the creator will receive nothing. At best, this can present a minor setback. At worst, it can kill a dream outright. Although it's often new ideas that suffer, it's not always the case. One campaign to bring back platforming hero Dizzy fell massively short of its goal, despite fans pleading for years for the eggy adventurer's return.
Crowdfunding can also be a risky venture for contributors. Just because a game is fully funded, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will ever see the light of day.
One such high-profile failure is Yog Ventures, which was supposed to see the hosts of the massively popular Yogscast YouTube channel coming full circle and starring in their own game. Despite raising over $500,000, developer Winterkill Games blew the lot, leaving them with neither a game to show for it, nor the means to offer refunds to its 13,647 furious backers.
Disasters like that have understandably led to increased cynicism and distrust of crowdfunded projects, but there are just too many success stories to be able to write it off completely.
Last year, I invested in the PS4 revival of Amplitude, one of my favourite games ever. Harmonix's track record, coupled with its great reputation for community engagement, gave me faith that theirs was a project that wouldn't end in crushing disappointment. While it's impossible to predict which streams will make it to reality, it pays to do your research and read the campaign notes carefully before committing. Alternatively, if you really want to play it safe, just don't bother donating at all. But then, where's the fun in that?
I've never put money into a Kickstarter game. I don't know, I feel there's something sort of Dragon's Den about the whole thing, isn't there? And I just kind of feel like, no, you get on with it and make your game and then I'll decide if I like it. I'm like the Duncan Bannatyne, really, of Kickstarter. I'm like third-person shooter set in a post-apocalyptic New York. I'm out.
I do pore over Kickstarter games and have a look, and yeah, but I haven't yet. That's terrible. That's like admitting you haven't given to charity. That's like, oh, I'm an awful person. Can I go? I don't like this anymore.
I spent $500 on a Kickstarter for a game called Amplitude. It was the game that made me fall in love with the rhythm action genre. So when they asked for money for a reboot, I gave them all of my money that I had. I didn't really think it would succeed, but then it did, and now I'm poor.
While enthusiasm for Kickstarter and crowdfunding in general may be dwindling, there's no questioning that a sizable number of great games released over the last 3 years wouldn't exist without it. This isn't a review, but for its services to gaming and the fact that it's getting me a new Amplitude, I'll still give Kickstarter an honorary. Right, here's John with another of his wonderful top 5s. It would have been a top 10, but sadly we didn't hit our stretch goal.
Hello, television friends. High def, high five. Crowdfunding, the relatively new way of making begging an essential part of the creative process. At its best, it helps fund games that we may have never seen without community support. At its worst, it turns game creators into just sad-faced junkies walking around holding out the styrofoam cup, begging for change to get a game made.
These are 4 games we might not have had without crowdfunding, and one we probably would have, but not for that much. Wowzers.
The first really big hit when it came to crowdfunding, Broken Age, is a point-and-click adventure brought to you by Tim Schafer.
We've covered Tim on this show before. He was the co-creator of the legendary Day of the Tentacle, designer of the noirish fun blast that is Grim Fandango, and Broken Age was his return to the world of pointing and clicking and adventuring.
Schafer and his crew at Double Fine put out the hat and asked for $400,000 and were rewarded with $3.5 million, which confirms 2 things I've always known.
1, there'll always be room for a funny adventure game, and 2, us nerds really do have a lot of money for the things we like.
This is a heartwarming story about the little guy triumphing in the face of the big competitive world, especially when you consider that successfully crowdfunded games are a field of weird kids selected by other weird kids. Even when you think about that, this is by far the weirdest of the kids.
Octodad Dadliest Catch is the sequel to Octodad, the game about an octopus trying to hide the fact he's an octopus from his loving family. You'd think the wife would have noticed since they somehow have kids, but let's not get all anime about this.
The original was released for free, the sequel was crowdfunded. It's a brave thing to do, release an entire game to build interest in another. The creators put out their tentacles and got $24,000, which might not seem like much.
But then the game came out on Steam, the PS4, and is heading to Xbox One and Wii U. It's made $4.9 million. $4.9 million.
It's an octopus, pretending it's not an octopus. $4.9 million. You can train an actual octopus for less than that. Amazing. One problem with crowdfunding is that sometimes people with name brand value go out hunting for money that you'd think would rightfully go to Johnny Anonymous and his posse of talented yet not famous friends. Sort of like if there was food that was intended for starving children in Africa and instead it got shipped to some fat kids in America so they could stay fat. There are exceptions.
Octodad got around it by making a whole game first, but then they had to make a whole game first.
Pillars of Eternity is another example of what a name and a proven body of work can do for you.
It's an RPG developed by Obsidian, who've made RPG installments for Star Wars, Fallout, South Park and Dungeon Siege. That's right, 4 huge franchises, 2 of which are the most well-known names in pop culture. Add that it's influenced by legendary RPG Baldur's Gate, and Obsidian rolled for public funding, they got over $4 million. That's a lot of orcs.
We've had point-and-click, swords and sorcery, and a deceptive cephalopod. You see, a lot of games that get crowdfunded aren't the most original titles you can think of. They're just games that sound like dream versions of games you've already played. Bear in mind, even the most original game on this list is still a sequel.
Shadowrun Returns is an isometric cyberpunk RPG based on the cyberpunk RPG franchise Shadowrun, which is what kids in trenchcoats were playing before the Matrix came along and ruined it for everybody. It was designed by the chap who created the original tabletop Shadowrun game, and also ties together the Shadowrun SNES game and the Shadowrun Mega Drive game.
Which makes this one big PC nostalgia fest that grabs every single iteration of a franchise in together for one colossal hackers with guns family cuddle.
Except for the shoot 'em up that came out in 2007. Screw that.
This game proves my point about a body of work and nerds with money.
Currently in development from the man who created the Wing Commander series, Star Citizen is
A massively multiplayer RPG, a first-person shooter, and a space combat game.
It's not a sequel to anything, it's just the biggest sounding project from someone who's made a ton of PC games set in space.
How much is a universe worth?
Over $79 million in public pledges.
And that's the end of the show. Well, unless we can hit our target to fund a second half within the next 3 minutes. Fingers crossed.
Anybody could say they'd do anything for cash. Not anything, but games.
Weekdays at 4:30, exclusively on Challenge.
Well, I'm still here, which means that we made it. Thanks very much to mysterious benefactor Manuel Dar for his generous contribution. Well, I'm obviously sold on crowdfunding, but what about our panel of chatty faces?
I think crowdfunding works for the games industry best of all. I think because it's something to do with like the vindication of what you love. You know, I think when people love something, when it's especially nerdy, you know, a lot of people around you, whether it be, you know, people in your life right the way up to like big companies and publishers and stuff, they say, oh, you know, no one wants a point and click adventure game. No one likes those. Those are niche.
I mean, you only have to look at, you know, the Double Fine adventure, obviously, with Tim Schafer. I mean, I remember reading a lot of stuff about how he'd go into all these meetings and say he wanted to make an adventure game, and as soon as they heard it was an adventure game, they were like, get out. No one wants to play those kind of games anymore. Then he ended up getting how many million when he only asked for like 400,000 or 300,000, something like that. It just goes to show that actually, you know, there is a market out there, and it's the easiest way to see what we as gamers truly want.
Crowdfunding is like your way of saying, actually, there's hundreds of thousands of other people who really want to have this point-and-click adventure game. So, you know, screw you. We just need to put some money in, and we can make it happen regardless of whether you think it's going to be a big deal.
Who are you guys?
We're the preeners, of course.
We take care of the nests and keep stuff floating. Super important.
Whenever you're trying to do something creative, you're always, to a certain extent, relying on business people who think in numbers in order to make it happen. The great thing about crowdfunding is that it takes that completely out of the equation. Now, the downside of that, of course, is that creatives aren't very good at that kind of planning a lot of the time. So sometimes you end up with projects that take forever or never come out or aren't what they're supposed to be. But when it all comes together, what you end up with is someone's brilliant idea and a lot of people who just really wanted to see it happen.
You know, I'm sure we've all, like, at least once read reviews of a game and thought, oh, brilliant, that sounds great. And we've gone and we've basically bet 40 or 50 quid on it, got it home and gone, well, actually, this isn't as good as I thought. It's not for me. So in that sense, I think gamers are used to taking a punt on a game and seeing how it turns out. So from that perspective, you know, bunging a few quid into something to help it get made doesn't seem like much of a stretch.
You're not even dressed!
Well, I mean, the pitfalls of crowdfunding are obvious, right? I mean, first of all, there's the fact that you might never actually see the thing that you're funding. Because a lot of the time, the people who are asking for crowdfunding, guess what? They're not that big. They're not a big deal. And that means that if you're not big, you don't have a lot of the support structures that a big company has in place.
The biggest problem with crowdfunding, for me, is that you're investing in something, but then you get no stake in whatever's made. One example would be Oculus Rift, which made a lot of money through crowdfunding and then got bought by Facebook. And suddenly there's thousands of people who've, kicked in to make this thing happen, thinking, shouldn't I be getting some kind of return on that investment now?
Essentially, people had the idea of a thing and assumed if somebody gave them cash, that would translate into them somehow being able to do it. And that obviously wasn't the case. So people have been stung by projects that either hadn't been completed or they've run over budget or over time and never been completed. But over time, people are going to learn the rules of how to crowdfund. So you'll want somebody with a pedigree or someone you can trust who will be able to do it, or a realistic budget based on what it is you think they're tabling. So I think the rules will get refined, and you'll see less of that as it works out what it is. Whereas at the beginning, it was just the Wild West, and anybody could say they'd do anything for cash. Not anything, but games.
I hope that crowdfunding does disrupt the traditional publisher model, because it is, it is a bit tedious now. There is such an emphasis on Metacritic scores and big budgets and AAA titles, and the publishers, they have such pressure to deliver sort of financial results. Whereas with crowdfunding, you've got this way in which people who've got big ideas but sort of small funds can actually get their stuff out there, and I think that can only be a good thing for gaming.
Crowdfunding already has disrupted the traditional video game market and the traditional publisher model. It's cut publishers out of the equation. There's games like Wasteland 2, which Brian Fargo was shopping around different publishers for literally decades, and it got funded in, I think, a couple of days when it went on Kickstarter. If that's not disruptive, then I don't know what is, actually.
I think it's interesting to look at a thing like Lego's Cusco program, which was basically kind of like an internalized Lego crowdfunding experiment wherein, people could submit ideas for Lego sets. So there's things like Ghostbusters Lego and stuff that's come through this. And then whatever's been upvoted the most and been, supported the most, Lego have actually officially gone out and published. I think that's probably the best model for games, is to have people saying, yes, I endorse this, Tim Schafer point-and-click adventure game, and then somebody like Sony actually publishes it, because I think then you get the best of both worlds. You get the control of the audience, but also the security and the expertise that does come with publishing.
I think a lot of the time these big titles, they're as much about marketing budgets as they are about the quality of the games. Like Call of Duty is a bad example because actually it's a great game, but if you've spent 3 months putting massive billboards all over the planet of your game, you're going to sell a certain amount of those games. It's just how the market works. So crowdfunding isn't going to steal that away from the more casual market, but as it evolves and people get more comfortable with the idea, it is going to allow us to fund games that otherwise might not get that opportunity. And that's a good thing, it's more choice.
Crowdfunding projects never cease to fascinate me. Sometimes proposals with seemingly obvious mass appeal fall flat on their faces, never to be heard from again. Other times, interesting projects get a bit of social media buzz and suddenly skyrocket, earning upwards of 100 to 300% of their original asking sum, which leads to another intriguing discussion about what the developer should do with all the leftover money.
No matter the results of these Kickstarters though, it's easy for us to watch from the sidelines and criticise and occasionally even buy into, but for developers it's a risky, often heartbreaking venture that can put their money and dreams on the line. For every success like Yooka-Laylee and Elite Dangerous, there are countless failures, and at the centre of those are developers learning tough life lessons.
One such developer is Elliot Myers, the creator of Roto VR, a motorized platform that can move and turn 360 degrees, designed to complement virtual reality devices like Oculus Rift. I saw and spoke to quite a few people who tried it out at this year's Res show, and all had pretty positive things to say about using it to play Alien Isolation. Nevertheless, it's a very ambitious piece of kit that few people would be willing to have in their living rooms, especially with VR still in its infancy. Unsurprisingly, the results of its Kickstarter reflected that. It sadly raised just over £11,000 of its £85,000 goal.
Crowdfunding can obviously really work if you've got a crowd behind you. I think we've learned a few things with crowdfunding. One is you need to have a crowd behind you, and we were starting from a standing position and we didn't have a crowd, and so we tried to get a crowd by getting some PR out there, getting some press, creating a decent video. But you're competing against companies that have got big budgets, and our video I don't think was quite up to scratch in terms of other products that are out there. Also, crowdfunding from a standing start, the US market is really significant, and if you don't get pick of the week, for example, on something like Kickstarter, then and you don't get that US press, then it's pretty hard to turn it around, even with a month cycle. But ultimately, we think we didn't succeed because, as I say, the consumer VR isn't out there yet, and it may not be out there for another year, possibly 2 years, before it becomes into people's homes and becomes, should we say, more mass market.
But it's not all bad news. Even when Kickstarters don't reach their goals, there are still a few lessons and a ton of online data that developers like Elliot can take away, study, and use to come back and try again.
Ultimately, we found that the crowdfunding campaign, although we didn't succeed, was a massive benefit in the end. We've got people that are very supportive of us, not just from an end consumer standpoint, but there's a lot of business opportunities that have come from it. So, yeah, if we did it again, I would say that we'd do a few things slightly differently, but ultimately it was a positive experience.
Inevitably, a crowdfunded game lives or dies on its ability to stand out from the crowd, and Cold Horizon is one such game. It's still early in development over at Big Cake Games, and it's helmed by the same team behind the aborted remake of the original Metal Gear.
With a fascinating premise and an eye-catching art style, they caught the attention of crowdfunding platform Indiegogo, which has signed a deal with Big Cake to bring the game to a wider audience.
I think Cold Horizon stands out because there's different cultural influences across the team. You've got the project lead is from Norway. You've got myself from Wales. You've got guys from Australia, America, Poland. So we're quite a multi-regional team, and I think there's a lot of influence in that. We're in sort of the soundtrack and the actual the graphic style as well is very unique. And I think that's going to interest people, and hopefully it's going to capture their attention. I think that we probably, with the game as it is, with Polar Bear and a Child as sort of the leads within the game, I think it's probably a bit of a risk, I guess, looking at it, and it may not be commercially viable. Whereas I suppose with crowdfunding and Indiegogo in our case, it's I feel that we allow people to speak with their wallets and react with their thoughts and come across and hopefully see if the game itself is something that would attract them. I think for us as well, it also gives us freedom with deadlines. We can work to whenever we want to, and we can tell people that's when it's going to be releasing. And also as well, I mean, it's a freedom as well. I mean, I think with a publisher, sometimes you can find a difficulty and you get attached to just like a sort of a style of play, or perhaps you may have to adjust the image slightly. But with crowdfunding, it's all your own vision, your own idea, and I think that will help.
So, crowdfunding isn't going anywhere. It might be a risky endeavour to developers and to gamers, especially when a project doesn't come to fruition, but it's a means to help smaller development studios get a foothold in the industry, and it gives gamers the chance to choose what they see and play. Given all that, with a little work, it can only be a good thing.
Which defunct game series do you think would benefit from the crowdfunding treatment? No, don't shout at the telly, you loon. Just drop us a line over on the official Video Game Nation Facebook page or on Twitter using the hashtag VGN. And if you say Gitteroo Man, you're my new BFF. Bye!
Stars in their eyes with me, Matthew Kelly. No, you're not dreaming. Challenge is being that good to you. See it right here at 9.
Thank you.